Welcome to the first episode of Season 2 of Speciality Sessions with me, your host, Natasha. Today, I'm joined with Anna Bertona, CEO of Azelis. Welcome to the podcast, Anna.
Thanks a lot, Natasha, for having me.
For anyone that doesn't know you personally or doesn't know Azelis, would you just let the listeners know who you are and what the business does?
Anna Bertona, I'm the CEO of Azelis. Azelis is a global innovation service provider focused on specialty chemicals and food ingredients. We are global. We are active in more than 60 countries, and we work actually at the intersection of our suppliers, which we call principals, and customers. Our purpose is very simple. We help our customers to win and our principals to grow by combining this technical expertise, market insight, and also a strong local presence.
What's really interesting, Anna, about your background is you didn't start your life in the chemical industry. Can you walk us through your journey into it?
Yeah, actually, indeed, when I joined Azelis, I was one of the few with a non-chemical background. I'm an industrial engineer, and I started also working as an engineer in automotive and consumer goods. And then I did an MBA and I moved into strategy consultancy. And that gave me a much broader strategic perspective on business than I had from my engineering times. I was actually working in many different industries, and that's also how I got into the chemical industries. But I really liked consulting because it gives you, as I said, broad perspective. It gives you a high level expertise and experience. But somewhere I always knew I wanted to go back into a more operational role where you're really accountable instead of giving advice to others. So when Azelis opportunity came along, I actually jumped on it.
When Azelis first approached you, what did you actually think about the business and sort of the chemical industry, well, specifically chemical distribution as a whole? And how has that perception changed now you're firmly in it?
Yeah, when I first was approached, I worked, as I said, in the chemical industry, but I never worked in distribution.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first contact, I thought, is this just between brackets, the delivering chemicals from I would say a large producer to smaller customers? But already in the first interview, I understood, no, this is so much more than that. It's this technical expertise, these labs. And that really started to get me excited. So I thought, I'm going to do a second interview to learn more about it.
Something that you said there about the misconception of just moving product from A to B, that's something that actually Marcus Jordan, CEO at IMCD, talked about in the episode with him in season 1. Do you think there are any other misconceptions or things that people misunderstand about chemical distribution aside from that?
Yeah, a lot of people think it's very transactional and low value added. But in reality, the industry has evolved much more in a highly specialized, knowledge driven service model. And it's so much more than just distributing physically the products. And at Azelis, we combine this innovation, but also regulatory, which has become much more difficult, this expertise around that, and digital, also very important. So combining all that, it gives a service offering that is so much more than just a transaction from buying a chemical.
What do you think makes that model so powerful when it's done well?
Well, you bring together a lot of things, and sometimes when you are a distributor, people think, yeah, this intermediation will come and then you're obsolete and it doesn't exist anymore. But there's so many different elements that a specialty chemical distributor does. As I said, this technical expertise, it's the proximity to customers, understanding what they want, having really feet on the ground, having formulation expertise, the regulatory, and bringing all that together is a very powerful mix that's not so easy to replicate and also not so easy to replace with something different.
I do think anyone that joins a distribution company at whatever level that may be, whether that's an entry level role or a leadership role, I think it's a really specific type of person that operates well in that environment, because I worked in distribution prior to recruitment, right, as you know, and there are so many plates for you to spin because you've got stakeholders at either end of your supply chain, right? Do you think it is an easy thing to transition from, let's say, manufacturing to distribution? Because there's all people move around the supply chain or in different types of companies, right? But I do think it's a specific type of person that does work in distribution from a search point of view. I'm interested to understand your thoughts on that.
It's a very good question, and we hire people from the chemical producing companies. And sometimes it works, but sometimes it doesn't. Distribution has a couple of aspects that are really different from being a producer. First of all, you mentioned it, you are a bit in the sandwich. So normally you have your customers that are the ones that put you under pressure, and normally you are the one putting up more pressure on your suppliers. And so that is goes. Here you are in the sandwich between two type of customers. I always say these two type of customers, being our principals as suppliers and the customers, are equally important. And I think that thinking is already very, very different. And the second thing that makes it very different is a distributor is agile and has a lot of complexity. Of course, we don't have to make the complex decisions. I'm not underestimating that about setting up a new production facilities and having multi-million, billion investments. We are asset light. We don't
Mhm.
have to make these difficult decisions. On the other hand, the diversity we have, so many different markets. We have more than 60,000 customers, more than 25,000 products. That complexity requires also a mindset that's different from producers, which, by the way, I like a lot, but not everyone succeeds in that coming from a producer.
The most important thing with any business that involves people is correct, appropriate leadership and inspiring leadership. And how would you describe your leadership style today?
I'm someone who sets clear direction. I'm very transparent about what I want and what I expect, but then I give quite some space to people to deliver. I really believe in empowerment combined with accountability. And very important for that is to have a purpose and values. Because if you have a strong purpose and values, people also know the perimeter in which they have to execute what I'm requiring from them. So that's a bit my style, I would say.
You mentioned empowerment and accountability just there. How do you actually balance that in practice? Because that's not always an easy thing.
It starts, of course, with clarity, as I said. People need to understand what we expect from them, what are the goals, and what are the boundaries. And then you give ownership and trust. You trust people to deliver, you support them where they can. And of course, I do follow up, but I follow up more on results, on outcomes, than on activities. That has evolved, of course, in the course of the year. If I would check all the activities of everyone today, that's just not possible. I also don't believe it's necessary. When I was a very young manager early in my career, that was a bit different though.
Yeah. I was going to ask actually how, and you brought it up there, how does your leadership style differ now to maybe earlier in the leadership part of your career? I'm assuming that might differ a little bit.
Yeah, I'm still the same person. So this element of trust is still important for me in the team, in my team. But I was much more controlling activities when I was a young manager. I think that also comes with maybe being a bit more insecure.
Mhm.
And now it's more about outcomes and much more empowerment. But also, of course, it comes with accountability. So I want that people deliver what I ask them to do.
I think sometimes with that, it comes with, like you say, experience, maturity,
Yeah,
sometimes learning the hard way a little bit as
absolutely.
well. We often talk about behaviors that are that really drive high performing teams, positive behaviors. But I think something that doesn't get a lot of conversation is actually the behaviors that can be quite damaging to that environment as well. What's your opinions on that?
But I really dislike politics.
Mm.
Politics is about personal positions, and it should be about the company. What I also think is detrimental, it's lack of ownership, just waiting for direction instead of taking initiative, especially the more senior roles people are having. Another point is silo thinking, and when you only optimize for your own small little element and are not able to look over the fence of your own responsibility. I think that's very important. And then, as I said, politics, I don't like. It goes also with the dislike on transparency, a lack of transparency, and on honesty. I think if people are not honest in the team, then you really are not having the best of your teamwork.
You mentioned about not working in silos there, and I agree. I think that's really important. But a company the size of Azelis, naturally, you do have that space between people, whether that's from an industry perspective, whether that's geographically or something else. How do you try and unify a business the size of Azelis? Because you still need to function, right? But also you still want people to talk to each other. How's the balance? How do you get the balance of that?
Yeah, you're right. Of course, the bigger you grow, the less I would say you as a person you can oversee in a function everything. So you get a bit more specialized functions. I think what's very important is always, as I said, the purpose and the values. That people know why are we doing this? What do we want to achieve in the bigger thing? And if that is clear, then you understand, okay, this is what I can do, but this is where we want to go. And then you will have everyone in the same direction. But it is not an easy thing. That's true.
You mentioned the why. It's something, and again, as a recruiter, we're always trying to fit people into boxes, right? And I think when we're speaking to candidates about roles, whether again that's at entry level or whether that's at senior leadership, helping the candidate understand the why, so that you're bringing them in along the journey and making sure that they're totally bought in with that company's plan and that ethos and that strategy. I think that's the starting point for all of it. And I think sometimes we're very fixed on looking at job descriptions, and we should be looking at why are we all working towards this common goal? Because that's how you get the cultural fits, right?
You're so right. You're so right. I think you can have the same job and dislike it or like it just on where you do this job and in which company.
You've moved between industry and consulting, as you've mentioned. How did that change the way you think and operate as a leader? Because not everyone who's the CEO of a chemical business has got that background in the consulting piece.
I consider myself lucky to have had both experiences. I started in industry, then consulting, then industry. And it's really different thinking because consultancy teaches you to structure problems and to think analytically. You also you need to understand very quickly the environment of a company. You normally have short assignments, and so you don't have 2 years to understand what's going on. And that sharpens your, finding the most important things to look at. But industry teaches you to decide quickly and to execute also with imperfect information, which you don't have that often. So I think it's if you go from operational job in industry and advising, it's going from probably from depth to speed and the other way around. I
Mm.
think these are the two things that make the difference.
Do you think you have to sort of consciously unlearn things when you move either one way or the other, actually?
Oh, yeah, I had it both ways. So when I was in industry, I went into consulting. Yeah, and then you have to think conceptually. I was a very pragmatic and practical person, and I was used to make quick decisions. But I needed much more to go on a fact-based analysis and then come back with an advice and not already start immediately executing, which I was used to do. And then I had unlearned it again when I went back to Azelis. Of course, as I did that before, it came back quickly. But yes, it's a different way of working, and I think both can bring a lot. And as I said, I'm glad that I had both experiences.
What did you find difficult about those transitions?
Yeah, as I said, in it's the difference between, on the one hand, the speed. So either I was too slow in the beginning in a environment of an industry,
Mm.
or too shallow in consulting. So finding that balance, I thought, was difficult.
Mm.
Especially, I think I had more difficulties in my transition from the first time industry into consultancy. Because
Mhm.
back then, yeah, you know a bit what is expecting from you. You just have to find back again how it was.
It's there already.
It was already there, yeah. It's like a bicycle, you never unlearn it.
Yeah.
Uh,
That you've spoken about with me before is the risk of over analysis coming from consulting when you do need to make quick decisions. But how do you think about decision making today now that you've got that rounded view and you've done the moves, back and forth?
Yeah, I think you have to accept you rarely have 100% information. So you need, and probably not even 80%. But just only to act without having some facts is also not right. And facts can be also getting input from people, so not just
Sure.
shooting from the hip, if I can
No.
say so. So I think that is, I believe, also the style that I use and that I feel comfortable with. I like to get input. I like to see some numbers, but then move ahead because we don't have time to sit and find even more information.
And I know this will change from scenario to scenario, but how do you personally know when you've got enough information to go ahead with something?
Yeah, of course, after so many years working experience, you kind of know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've been around some years, but it comes back, I think, to when you know that even more information is probably not going to change the decision. There are also some no regret moves,
Mm,
or if you have to wait so long for new information that you will miss the boat. And I
mhm.
think that's the thing that I keep in mind, maybe even subconsciously, but when I decide or when I say, no, I need some more input.
I don't want to labour too much on this point, but when you look at the demographic of leadership within chemical distribution, you are the only female managing one of the top 5 or 6 global chemical distribution companies. Earlier in your career, did you ever feel underestimated?
Yeah, I did. I did. And underestimated versus male colleagues.
Mm,
I've yes, I've experienced that during my career. I would say more earlier on than later on. I think that things have changed just also in society, which
mhm.
makes it, if you look young couples now divide much more the tasks. Often they're both working. So I think it's become more easy than it was maybe 30 years ago.
How have you seen the industry specifically evolve in that respect over time?
Actually, if I see in the last years, I see more and more female leaders.
Yeah, I
You're
agree.
right, not CEOs, but maybe some levels below.
Mhm.
We are lucky at Azelis, we have more than 50% women overall. We are around 30% in leadership, and that I think is a good number, but yeah, I want it to be higher, obviously.
Sure.
But I've seen it improving. I think 13 years ago when I joined Azelis, there would be meetings when I would go also to principals, to our suppliers. Only men. Now you have a much more diverse.
What do you think still needs to improve in the industry broadly?
To be even more conscious that diversity is important and what you need to do to get there. And I'm gonna make a very broad generalization, but
Sure.
what I have seen during my career is that often men are more open for a challenge that stretches their current levels, and where women are more like they want to make 100% certain, they want to be 100% certain that they can do this job, which is a
Mhm.
promotion. And they will do equally well, but they just have a different starting position. And what that means is if you're opening a position, probably you will have the men applying for it and the women not because they think they're not ready, but they are equally ready. So you have to be very conscious and ask them, hey, did you see that function? Maybe you should apply. And if they say, I'm not sure, yes, yeah, yeah, I'm sure, just try it. And then in the process, you will give them the confidence that they can do it. And I think these kind of things are important to get even further in diversity.
There was an analogy actually that Julia Schlenz gave on her episode, which is episode 2 of season 1 of the podcast, and she said about having something that just feels half a shoe size too big, which is it kind of moves around a little bit, but your foot doesn't totally come out. And I thought that was a really nice analogy, and that's almost the point that you're making, isn't it? It's to take a step. You're never going to have 100% of the either the information or the qualifications because ultimately you've never done the role before. But it's about being brave enough to take a step and maybe have a bit of a wobbly shoe for a little while.
Apparently, men mind less having a wobbly shoe than women. We like more tight shoes. I don't
Yeah,
know.
maybe. We've obviously spoken about talent and we've spoken about that maybe attracting talent isn't the challenge. It's retaining it at certain life stages. And I think that feeds into things like dual incomes in households and things like that. But can you talk a little bit more about that and what you meant by it when we've discussed it?
Yeah, it's, and I think there are many surveys around this. There's a moment where women exit the workplace
Hmm.
to have children. And even if Nowadays, you have also paternity leaves. Yeah, there's still a period that they go out. In some countries, that can be even a year or sometimes even two. And often that's also in the age that you get this next step of being into a more managerial role.
30s and 40s, isn't it?
Exactly. And unfortunately, yeah, I think, therefore, women miss out on a very crucial moment in the career. But yeah, it's a fact. And therefore, I think when hiring and also externally, yeah, sometimes maybe therefore women have less proven experience. And therefore, I think you should look more at skills
Mm.
than only experience. And then, yeah, then someone can have a good shot at even without having done that job already before.
And what do you look for when you're building your leadership team? What are the sort of, forget the skill set, because obviously there needs to be a level of that, but in terms of attributes and attitude and the things that you can't teach?
Yeah, I think for Azelis, as I said, the ability to operate in a complex and agile environment is very, very important. It's
Mm.
big decision making, it's a lot of complexity, and you need to like that and also have the skill. And then coming back, I look for people who like to take ownership and who don't mind to be taken accountable for what they do. And then last, I think we should not forget people who are looking at the world with a customer mindset. So really, and customers for us are two, as I said, two groups. But this customer mindset is very, very important.
And how do you mentioned about taking ownership, and that's a theme that's kind of run through this episode, really. But how do you ensure that people do take ownership while in role rather than waiting for direction, whether that's from you or whether that's from another, manager?
I think first of all, it's the environment and the culture that we have at Azelis and that I preserve. So people who work within Azelis know that that is important. But in the end, it's also about not giving tasks, but giving responsibility and objective, and then let them figure out how to get there within the framework of our purpose and our values. And I think trust is very important. If people know that they are allowed to make a mistake while they get towards these objectives, and it's a learning opportunity, that is an environment I think that gives people more push to be taking this responsibility and not just wait till people tell them what to do because if I make a mistake, then maybe there's are terrible consequences.
Mm. And everyone makes mistakes, and I'm sure that you're no exception to that. But what's been one of the toughest periods in your career, and what did you learn from that?
I think one of the toughest times, it's actually quite some time ago, and I worked for a company that was in financial troubles. And I was so worried what it would mean for me and will I find another job and all these kind of things. And I applied there the advice that actually stick most to me in my whole career. And it was actually my father who told me. And he said, just focus on the things that you can control
Hmm.
and don't waste time in ruminating on things that you can't control. It's a very simple advice. It's yeah, I've read that so many times, but that has in my career always been a very good point to think of because you always have a lot of things going on. Look today, Middle East crisis. We have a war in Ukraine. So many things going on. I could lose sleep every night. But
Yeah.
what I try to focus is I can't change this, but I can do that. And that's
Mm.
what I have to focus on. So
Mm.
that's what I apply. And that was also in this very difficult time was what I focused on. And that helped me through the times.
Is there anything that you believe about leadership today that you didn't earlier in your career?
Yeah, I think when I was much younger, I thought you needed to have the answer immediately, everything. You
Yeah.
needed to be the super specialist.
Mm.
But actually, that's not how it works. You
Mm.
need to understand, of course, where to get the information. You
Mhm.
need to have the holistic view. You need to know where you want to go, but you don't need to be knowledgeable in all the areas. You have to surround yourself with a great team who is an expert in all these areas. And that changed over the years.
And sometimes that's easier said than done, isn't it? Letting go. Like you said, earlier when we've been speaking about kind of giving away some of that control and letting other people be accountable for their own thing. It's, again, a lesson that you can only learn over time with experience, right?
Yeah, sometimes you just have to have some more, I would say, mileage, and then things come by themselves.
What advice would you give someone stepping into a senior leadership role for the first time?
First, be very clear on what truly matters.
Mm,
It's about focus, and not doing everything. Really prioritize on the things that only you can do and someone you cannot delegate. And second, as I said, surround yourself with a very good team, because you cannot be the specialist in everything. So make sure that you have a team that has the right expertise, that is compensating maybe the elements that you are weaker in, and
mm.
then where there is, yeah, this high performance environment where everyone thrives in. And I think we should not forget, I mentioned it before, but having focus on customers and not too much an inward focus. Outward focus is also incredibly important if you step into a new senior leadership role.
And look, the market, let's be honest, is not in an easy place at the moment, especially in Europe. And it's been talked about widely across this podcast as well. And I'm also very conscious that we need to be realistic, but I also don't want to be doom and gloom, right? And Azelis is widely recognized in the market. What excites you most about, you know, the industry, where Azelis is heading at the moment?
I don't see any, I would say, even in this big turmoil, diminishing demand for our services, neither from our customers nor from our principals. And it starts with that. If they don't need our services anymore, yeah, okay, then you're obsolete. But this need is still there. It might evolve, priorities might be different, and that's reassuring, but also very exciting. And I'm sure that in 10 years' time, our role might have evolved into maybe more into even more an advisory role than just moving the boxes.
Hmm.
But yeah, there's really a lot of demand for services that we deliver, not only us, but our kind of companies. And that excites me. And there's a lot of things going on. Some things, as I said, you cannot change, but you can think about how can I position Azelis to benefit from it the most.
When you are running a company with thousands of people, with the market it is at the moment, people do feel nervous, they do feel unsettled. And when the people at the top are saying, actually, we're being realistic, it's difficult, it's hard, these are all the challenges that we're facing, but here's the opportunity that can come from it. I think that's a really important message to keep the team motivated in a challenging time, and all the things that we need to keep the wheels on. But I think it also relies leaders to really hold a mirror up to themselves, and really look at how they're operating with their people. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree. First of all, yeah, you're never ready to learn. That's my mindset, and it's true that the longer you are in, I would say, in the workforce, the more experience you have. But there's always opportunity to learn and also to develop yourself. At this moment, what I can see is that there's so many things going on, so many things that how to stay focused, how to make sure that I prioritize what's really important and I'm not distracted by everything that's happening. That's something that I can still improve.
Mm.
And I'm a focused person, but again, in this environment, this ability is even challenged. And I think also what is something I can still improve in is something you were explaining. You want to make sure that you're not sugarcoating things too much. But on the other hand, yeah, you also want to paint a picture that's positive and
Hmm.
find the right balance in that. I don't think that for a leader that's very easy. So I'm always looking at inspiration, how other people are doing.
And as we come to the end of the podcast, I always ask the guests the same question for each season. Season 2 is different to season 1, so you're the first person I'm asking this question to. What is something that you've changed your mind about over the course of your career?
I think it's actually the point we mentioned about this super specialist. As I thought, the big leader needs to know the most of all the topics. And that really changed during the years. And as I become first a young manager, and then I evolved in my career, I understood it is impossible. So I really changed in mindset what a leader should look like and how much he should know himself and how much he just has to rely on a very good team. That's
What a
what changed.
great way to end the podcast, Anna. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you. And it was a pleasure.